Hello, Renegade marketers. If this is your first time listening, welcome. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. In this episode, executive recruiter Hugh Marshall of Heidrick and Struggles joins one of our monthly huddles for CMOs in transition, known as the transition team, to offer a clear read on today's CMO market. He explores why some CMO roles in PE-backed and growth stage companies are far riskier than they first appear, where alignment tends to break down, and why the smartest candidates do as much diligence on the company as the company does on them. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. You'll be supporting our quest to be the #1 B2B marketing podcast. All right, let's dive in. Hello, transition team and other huddlers. I'm excited to introduce you to Hugh Marshall, a senior executive at Heidrick and Struggles, also in charge of the marketing practice at Heidrick, someone who focuses on placing CMOs at particularly tech companies. And Hugh, I probably butchered your introduction because I'm not working from notes, which is unlike me. But welcome, Hugh, and feel free to add anything of interest to my introduction.
No, well, Drew, thanks for having me again. It's great to see all of you. Some names and faces I definitely recognize as well, and others that I don't. As Drew mentioned, I exclusively focus on placing senior marketing leaders. Half of what I do is full stack CMO, but then the other half is direct reports to a CMO across all of the verticals that you would anticipate: growth, demand generation, product marketing, corporate marketing, and broad from a client perspective. We actually do more work within venture and private equity than we do with public companies. And the majority of what we actually do is at that $1 to $500 million PE range, as that's where there seems to be the largest amount of turnover that happens within this function, unfortunately. I'm here to answer questions. What's unique about what I do is I get to see the world of marketing through the lens of our clients. And a lot of those people aren't marketeers by background. I could tell you the searches on one hand where the CEO or the president was a former CMO. So it's an uphill battle in this function, but looking forward to the discussion.
So I realized one was I wasn't your interviewer at the Super Huddle. So
No.
I wasn't. And the last time you and I were together, we were on a panel, both of us, talking about the role. You said something really important: 100 million to 500 million PE backed. I read somewhere that is the combination of the lowest possible CMO tenure, something like 17 months at PE-backed firms. Does that sort of line up with what you're saying?
It doesn't surprise me at all. That data is hard to track because it changes so frequently and depending on the year, but there's so much turnover there because that's the size and stage where there's growth at every size and stage. Of course there is, but going from 100 to 200 is a completely different animal than going from 250 to 500. And where we do this, the least amount of work is actually at that 500 to a billion range, because at that point something's working and it's clearly working for a good amount of time. But then once we get to the $1 billion size and stage, that's when we do a lot of work again. It's just interesting to spot some of these cycles. However, I will say that even in the last 6 months, we've done far more 500 to $1 billion work than we have in the last couple of years. So we're seeing a slight trend and shift in that regard. But Drew, there's a lot of turnover that happens from a PE standpoint. That could be a number of factors: the time in which private equity companies are holding on to their assets, new CEOs coming in, new investment that happens. And, this isn't 3-4 years. This is 5, 6, 7, 8 years plus. And there's going to be changes from an ELT standpoint. Marketing's never the first change, but it always is a change eventually. But there's still a huge amount of growth opportunity at the same time.
So I want to make sure that it feels like there are more CMOs landing in the last 6 months than there were 18 months ago. Fair?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And why do you think that is? Why? I mean, because these aren't startups. These are, in fact, I'm seeing more mergers of companies. I mean, Clary and SalesLoft merged. That's 2 CMOs that became one. So where are these opportunities? How is it that the market seems to be warm, if not hot right now?
Yeah, the market seems to be warm and hot, a lot warmer and hotter, Drew, than this time last year, I would say. personally and professionally. I'm seeing a lot of people landing at some venture-backed businesses. Venture seems to be in a good spot at the minute, especially from an AI native standpoint. There's a lot of money being put into businesses. And these are quote unquote startups that I'm seeing, but they're startups that are already gaining strong traction from a revenue standpoint. It's not a $5 million startup. It's a $50 million startup, $20 million startup. So there's some people that want to be in AI native businesses. And so the risk that they're taking is going to a vertically aligned AI company to do that and hope that it pays off for whichever exit, acquisition, etc. But there's more of those companies now than we've ever had before. And though that means that the supply and demand issue kind of works itself out in that regard, which is a good thing. The nervousness that I have is which of those companies just gets acquired? How does that stand out differently from what other company is doing? There's very vertically aligned businesses, which is always kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt some of these businesses will fail, some will be merged, and who knows, and some will limp along. But it's good because that makes up for the merged brands. So let's just focus on that for a second. AI native companies. For those present or those listening, what does it take to get one of those roles? And because look, we're dealing with a short period of time. It's hard for any CMO to say, I'm an AI native CMO, right? I mean, unless they were, a founder at Anthropic, in which case they probably aren't looking for another CMO role. How are CMOs presenting themselves as AI savvy, if that's even the right term? And what's the best case that they can make?
Look, Drew, it's a very good and very hard question to answer, candidly, because the first part of it, how do you get one of those AI native roles? I think the self-awareness piece is important here. If you think about who Anthropic have brought in, who OpenAI have brought in, they're bringing in scale. Like they're bringing in leaders from Meta, from Salesforce, from ServiceNow. So they're clearly not doubling down from an AI standpoint, but they are doubling down from how do we get to double-digit billion from 10 to 50, from 50 to 100, etc. So you're going to see more of that happening, candidly. But some of the earlier AI native businesses, that's where you could have the opportunities more, I would assume. A lot of my clients, even those when we have worked with the big native AI players, their first question to us is never, what's this person done from an AI perspective? It's like, how have they scaled and gone through growth and complexity? And what's their hyperscale experience? More so than what's their AI credibility, candidly. I think where marketeers have the opportunity with AI, I mean, it's limitless at the end of the day, but most companies are thinking about, look, what does adding AI tools to legacy workflows, that's just going to yield fairly marginal gains. But if you're redesigning processes, that's going to yield exceptional gains. And how are you doing that through AI? There's no right or wrong way with AI yet. Everybody will have a different opinion of a tool or an agent that they created that does something very well versus somebody else. And it's about just being as exploratory and as hands-on with this as you can be. We've got a fairly short shelf life before this becomes absolutely beyond paramount to any client that will be putting it as part of a case study interview process or however that may be. But right now, there's not a critical mass of, okay, well, everybody did this one thing in AI and that worked, so we're all going to kind of move to that model. I think we're seeing it a lot from a content creation standpoint with blog posting, with conversations in a CMO for a public company and, hey, how have you utilized AI the most? And her mention was definitely on the content side of the house, and it's not reduced workforce as much as she'd anticipated, but it definitely 20 people out of 100 could be done through AI, at least initially. You doing as much as you can from an AI perspective will just go an incredibly long way to be as best informed and actually have tangible results and not just here's a good process, but here's what it yielded.
Has anyone suggested yet as part of their interview process and their candidacy that I'm prepared to completely redesign marketing from the ground up with AI at the core?
I've not heard it from any of my clients, Drew. That is a very heavy lift, and that's paid work, candidly.
Yeah, no, it's right around the corner, and I do think that because this content story that CMO told is that's a low yield story. That's just looking at existing
Yep.
things, doing things the way we always did it. Can we do it faster? As you said, it's a low yield. But if we could rethink go to market and rethink marketing and walk in with it, then in fact, by new ways of going to market, we might actually be able to, 10x employee productivity, 10x impact. And that's the thing. I was just wondering if anybody is there yet promising that.
I've not heard it. I've not seen
Okay.
it. I think it'll still be a while, but we are anticipating it to become more and more of, it's always been important for the last couple of years, but it's just under such a big spotlight right now. Candidly, the problem is, even if you're talking about, look, what's a good demand generation campaign, or how do you think about messaging, positioning our product set vis-a-vis our competitors? A lot of CEOs don't know what that answer is, candidly, or how you go about doing that. So at what point are they also going to be in a position where they know what good AI marketing looks like, and they're going to respond positively to whatever you may end up sharing with them? That's the harder part of all of this. Is marketing is still widely misunderstood, and everybody has a very different perspective on what they think good looks like. So that's the hard part here.
Are you seeing successful candidates? Does it feel like they are preparing? Well, this is a two-part question. Are they preparing differently? That's part one. And part two, is the process of hiring evolving as a result of just, any number of market forces, including AI?
I think yes to both parts, Drew, but I personally feel that this was driven more because of what happened during the COVID era, where individuals just made moves so quickly, and hiring was so competitive at that point because every company had funding, every company was going to IPO, every company had unicorn status, and every company had a lot of money to go and do it. So a lot of people took jobs that maybe they shouldn't have taken. A lot of people hired people that maybe they shouldn't have hired. And it's not because they weren't, they didn't have the right skill set. It could just be that it wasn't the right alignment. Their marketing background was more product centric, and at that period everybody wanted demand generation leaders, or they doubled down on PLG and now it's stuck because they need to move to SLG. So the process is different because we kind of are at this hybrid of in office and not in office. And so that's come back into the equation very aggressively. And then it's also
let's talk about that before we go off it.
Okay.
When you say it's come back, just to clarify, employers are insisting that CMOs live and work and be in the market of the headquarters.
It depends, Drew, on the client, candidly. And again, there's going to be more flexibility from a VC client than there will be from a X billion-dollar public company. But as a standard rule, if we were to put numbers behind it, 70% of our clients are wanting their leaders as a CMO to be locationally close to HQ.
Right.
I still haven't done a 5-day-a-week CMO search. I've heard a few that are out there, and ironically, they're the ones that have been on the market for the longest.
Right.
But some form of hybrid, 2-3 days a week. Even with the largest technology companies, most of them are only hiring in certain hubs, not necessarily HQ, but okay, you can either be Seattle, New York, Austin, San Francisco, San Jose, etc. But we are seeing a lot of that. Again, from a venture perspective, there's probably going to be more openness there than there would be for public companies, and private equity is somewhere in the middle.
And what about relocation? Are in some cases, look, if you talked about some of these people recruiting from ServiceNow and Meta, and so and they're looking for that kind of scale, and this person has to suddenly move from New York to Silicon Valley. Is relocation part of the comp package again?
Yes, it is. But I do think that for the companies that you just referenced there, Drew, those larger public companies, that's less about being in HQ and it's more about being in a central hub, of which, does somebody need to move from New York to San Francisco? Probably not, but because they've got 2 huge offices in each of those locations.
Right.
But will they spend a lot of time traveling? You bet.
Right.
But yeah, for a non-insert big city HQ company that is looking for somebody, relocation becomes a massive part of this. And Jacob and I actually, Drew, were talking about this the other day because, some of the comp packages he's putting together, I was like, I need to work with you for this.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, I just read his latest Substack post on it, which is why it's so top of mind. If you're not following Jacob Warwick on Substack, because he's off LinkedIn, I highly encourage you to find him and follow him. Very interesting post on comp and relocation, and what he called it, relocation lifestyle. Anyway, it was very interesting approach to getting your a severance package higher because of not only changing market, but you're changing your life and you're walking away from a lot of stuff. So interesting, fascinating stuff. I
But Drew,
interrupted you.
yeah, because on the process perspective,
Yes.
we've all got like clients have gotten smarter. We've all figured out what did and didn't work over the last few years as we've blended that in person and Zoom, etc. And enough companies have gone through enough hiring cycles to iron out the kinks, shall we say. I'm seeing far more streamlined processes, which is really encouraging, and people not having to take unnecessarily long amounts of time to make a decision, which is great. You've got within private equity firms, you've got very sophisticated internal teams that help as part of it, that work with search firms like mine and others. And then even in VC, they've been building networks and networks and networks of CMO talent, CRO talent, HR talent, etc., that they can leverage in tandem with working with search firms or other recruiting firms as well. It's still really important that you as people in the market, when you're having conversations, and all of this is so painfully obvious, but you'd be amazed how often people miss it, is should be doing as much diligence on them as they are doing on you. Like, they will be back channeling you from the get-go, and you should be doing the same thing. Because whether you are guilty of it or not, CMOs have this reputation of being jumpy. And even if you've not been jumpy, or even if you have been at companies that have been acquired or however it may be, it's on you to make sure that where you land, you're going to think of it as a 3 to 5 year period, not as a 1 to 2 year run.
Interesting. I think that's so fascinating. And yet somehow they're worried about jumpy, yet the likelihood is they're the ones who are going to pull the cord at 17 months.
I agree, Drew. But again, for them, it's like, okay, well, it didn't work, or maybe we actually wanted a bias towards product marketing and we had someone who was really strong in demand generation. To them, it doesn't make a difference because they can then just bring somebody else in. And unfortunately, marketeers then become the victims of that. Whether it's
Right.
fair or not, it's a completely different topic of conversation. But the process has evolved, and making sure that you as a candidate are doing your diligence, not just on the people, but the investors, the company, again, there's probably been enough marketeers that would have come and gone from that business, understand why, and take it with the right context as well.
Yeah, on the due diligence, there's no doubt this back channel is happening. And just a reminder, if any of you are new to the transition team at CMO Huddles, we have something called the Huddle Buddies Playbook. And step one is to go pretty broad on your network for direct reports, level, and bosses and so forth. Anybody that might be connected with you and might be contacted by someone else, you might as well beat them first and find out what the heck they're going to say about you. And hopefully it will be positive and reconnect with those folks for a number of reasons. But yeah, it is, that's just fundamental because you are going to do it. What are the candidates doing and you're seeing on their side to increase their odds of landing the job? I mean, I know that there's still this, and you and I've talked about this before, this sort of perfect match, unicorn fit, 6x6, whatever. Right. And that's key. And you can't, if you don't have the experience that they're looking for, the size of growth of their experience, you're not going to be able to do it. But let's say you have those and there are 3 other candidates who do. What are the candidates that are landing doing that somehow is different than the others?
The thing that always stands out to myself and to my colleagues is the interest level from candidates. And I know that might sound silly, but follow-up notes, doing things that are slightly unprompted, Drew. It's not about, you mentioned, do you offer to redesign their go-to-market motions or the marketing organization, but even just sharing with the CEO what you've learned throughout the process at various points. There's a balancing act here, because if you do that too much, it can come across in the wrong way. But when you can demonstrate excitement appropriately and lean in with data, with suggestions, with ideas, even if they might be ones that are risky, I think that can give you a very, very competitive edge, because it just demonstrates to not just the CEO, but to the entire organization or the board or the investors, look, this person is clearly very interested and excited, and it's coming across authentically and not like, it's not too much, it's not over the top. They're really leaning in, and that's what we want to hear, because they want that in the market. That has been something that some people do incredibly well, some people don't do and just don't think about doing, but it goes a very, very long way, especially from a VC and a PE standpoint.
Yeah, I wasn't in a fraternity or a sorority, but it's sorority rush if they don't believe you want to be in that with them, of them all the time. So you really do have to commit. I wonder, so we talk about with this framing of hypotheses, because that's a very scientific thing. Does that language resonate where you're going back to the CEO and say, I have 3 hypotheses that if they are accurate or that I would want to work with you to prove,
Yeah.
that framing helps?
That framing helps. Or based on the conversation that I had with James Smith on the finance side and John Smith on the product side, like I can already spot a mismatch here. Or and you don't just have to be a yes person in this regard to say that everything's great, call something out when it's not working. Because at the end of the day, if you're calling out something very blatantly obvious that's not working or that seems highly dysfunctional, and you then get pushback on that and it terminates you as a candidate, then it's probably a blessing, not a problem, because you were the one that was going to be headed in that direction and taking that on, that responsibility, and clearly not being able to fix it, yet your head would be on the chopping block. The hypothesis scenario, Drew, is a really good one because it doesn't then just mean that you are thinking through one tunnel way of, hey, here's what I've heard, and this is the only thing that I'm going to drive home. It's potentially these various several issues or areas or opportunities, I shouldn't use the negative connotations here, for growth inside the organization. Or what I'm hearing is that there's better alignment with sales than there is with product, but insert X.
Right. Okay. We did have a question about East Coast, West Coast, and I know you're focused on tech. So I'm imagining that the opportunities you're seeing are more West Coast, but I don't want to presume.
No, I mean, it's broad. We've got lots of East Coast work right now, but I'm always going to see more of a critical mass here because that's where I am. But I will work on East Coast searches. I'll work on international searches. New York is definitely picking up more and more and more as a hub. And we're even from our European colleagues hearing a lot more about, we need a US based executive for this business. And from a time zone standpoint, the West Coast is not going to work. So who do you know from a growth marketing standpoint in New York? So it is an exciting time in that regard. But historically, it's been that a lot of the talent is here, but there's been a massive boom from a New York and a Boston and a DC standpoint over the last 5 to 10 years, which is really exciting. So it's fairly balanced, candidly.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This show is brought to you by CMO Huddles, the only marketing community dedicated to B2B greatness and that donates 1% of revenue to the Global Penguin Society. Why? Well, it turns out that B2B CMOs and penguins have a lot in common. Both are highly curious and remarkable problem solvers. Both prevail in harsh environments by working together with peers, and both are remarkably mediagenic. And just as a group of penguins is called a huddle, our community of over 300 B2B marketing leaders huddle together to gain confidence, colleagues, and coverage. If you're a B2B CMO, why not dive into CMO Huddles by registering for our free starter program on cmohuddles.com. Hope to see you in a huddle soon. So we've talked about the enthusiasm, the interest, the genuine interest, or the perception of genuine interest. And I think, a lot of candidates are on the fence about a job at a certain point in time. They might have seen a red flag and so forth. And I have sort of always believed that you got to get yourself to the mindset where you can get to an offer. Some feel that's not true because, if early on you don't get an offer. I'm just curious, this balance of, I don't find it hard to generate interest, or I know a lot of folks can, I'm not going to say feign, but they can get excited about a challenge because it's a challenge, but they may or may not be truly interested. How important is faking it and getting the offer versus legitimately, what I'm saying?
The conflict that somebody like myself would have here is that, look, success to me doesn't just look like how quickly someone can be in seat and they've got their offer and they've started at the company. It's actually, how are they doing in 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 years time at that business? That's what's more important. It's quality over quantity scenario. The biggest hiccup I see with getting to the offer part is once you get to an offer stage and you see real numbers in front of you, I think as human beings, we can naturally be very enthusiastic, and that can actually cloud potential judgment on, okay, am I just excited because of the offer, or am I actually excited because of the people I've met through the process, the company, the opportunity, the growth potential? I would rather have an issue with a client and not be at an offer than get to an offer where somebody accepts and then in 6 months that they're out the door, candidly. But that's my way of thinking about it, because we have to balance, obviously, the candidate side versus the client side, what's
I
really
guess,
important as a marketeer, you're getting out of bed every morning. You should be passionate about what you're marketing and what you're taking to market, and how you're talking about the products, the business, the services, the people you work with, etc. The offer is critical. Like, anybody that says it's not, that's not true. Like, of course it is. But I'm less on your side, Drew, on that one, just because, I saw this firsthand all the way through COVID, where people just saw these dollars and cents symbols. And a lot of those people 2 years later, 3 years later, 4 years later, are not of those businesses anymore.
right. And just so I think one thing is clear is that if you can't express passion through your actions for the opportunity, you're not going to get the job, right?
Correct.
That is a deal breaker. So, but I'm not advocating in any way that you take a
No.
job because you got to,
Oh, of course not.
right. But you can't get the offer unless you go after it as if this was the best job in the world for you. That's
Yeah.
different. That's different than accepting the offer.
Correct.
Right.
But it's a balance, because if you come across too excited or too eager, in the UK, you'd say too keen,
Right.
that won't land either. And that will look, the parallels to dating in what we do is massive,
Right.
in what I do, rather, in terms of, you need to show interest. If you show too much interest, does that put the person off? If you show no interest, even if you like them, like, how do you read those mixed signals? It really is a bit of a dating dance that we're doing here. And
Right.
with any job, it's also like buying a house. There are trade-offs. There's no perfect job. There's no perfect company. There's always something that, it's got a smaller kitchen, or it's not southern facing. Being realistic is important too. That's probably better articulated towards a client, candidly, than sometimes a candidate. But yeah, it's a real balancing act.
So, other than being too keen or not keen at all, are there other characteristics that sort of quietly kill candidates' chance of getting a job in the process?
I can't put a finger on something specific, Drew, because investing the time to go to where the client is, ideally it's somewhere local, doing those things in person, having those conversations, getting ahead of some of the referencing that you mentioned, Drew. It may be, look, this is not formal referencing, but I'm very excited about this company. If you want a good perspective on how I work with sales, please talk to this sales leader. Or sometimes offering up that impromptu information will go a really long way. You don't have to even do that with the company specifically, but to the recruiting partner that you're working, whoever that may be. Like, it's things like that that can just help, because we're doing that anyway. So why not get ahead of it?
Right. It's funny. I immediately channeling Brent Adams and make buying easier. So yeah, if you can serve up references for them and a broad level of them.
Yeah.
And
Being as transparent with whoever, again, you're working with from a comp standpoint, and having those conversations early as well, because the worst thing that can happen is, you fall in love with the company falls in love with you, but you've never had the comp discussion and you're just thinking completely differently in that regard. And that's never an ideal situation as well.
let's talk comp. Trends, at least up, down, sideways. A year ago, I asked this question of a recruiter, and they said it's not ageism, it's wageism, and that was a lot of push to drive CMO down. And then, of course, you read Jacob's thing, and he's placing 7-figure or negotiating 7-figure packages for CMOs. So, what's going on in comp right now?
I mean, comp seems to be fairly similar to last year, Drew. I would say I've not seen like a fundamental shift as of yet, to be honest. Again, it depends on who you're working with. Private equity are always going to want to, in any function, if they can do it a bit more efficiently, then they will try to do that. Being as upfront, like I mentioned, with whomever you're working with about your quote unquote expectations, because that's legally what we have to ask for, not just about where you've been most recently, but where you were prior to that and where you want to be. The issue that I hear about a lot within the marketing world is that, and I've had this recently with a lot of candidates just saying, oh, well, I put it into ChatGPT. Like, how much money should I be making at a $200 million venture-backed business? I don't trust that as much, candidly. There are so many factors that will determine the difference between, that 350 versus that $400,000 base, for example. And so having conversations within your community is really important, but I think also take it with a grain of salt at the same time. I'm happy to talk about comp with anybody offline when appropriate as well, of course. And just be conscious that when you're going into private equity, when you're going into venture, even if you're going into technology public companies right now, like stocks are down. That's probably a good thing, candidly, versus people that went during the boom years at the top of the market. How long has the PE firm been involved? When was the last round of venture funding? What does the cap table look like? These are questions that might be daunting to a lot of folks because you don't know what they mean, but you have every right to ask all of them, candidly. And it's your opportunity to play the ignorant card in the right way. Every job spec has to have a range, but they're so broad that it's not that helpful. And the problem is whenever anybody puts a range, or even if you were to share with me, here's my range of comp, no one looks at the lower end of it. You automatically always go to the high end of what you see in that JD. So I understand why it's done and it's important to build transparency, but it's vague transparency, which is the annoying part there.
From an equity standpoint, this is an area that I have no experience in. Are you seeing equity packages, particularly with PE firms? Because, the expectations of 996 or some kind of extraordinary commitment in terms of time and energy to help them get to their next level. I would think that some kind of equity is an important part of the comp these days.
Oh, and equity is where, that's where the real money is. Absolutely. It's impossible to say, hey, here's what your equity should be. It will depend on the size, the stage of the business. But if equity is not a part of it, do not enter the conversation.
And what are there some other things that the folks listening could sort of takeaways in terms of helping them evaluate and approach the equity conversation?
It's so hard because even every PE firm will analyze equity differently, the way that they do it. I mean, for context, in 2021 to 2023, I remember when we were giving offers, some PE firms would even demonstrate through spreadsheets, through PowerPoints, here's what this equity looks like and they would start at 15x. And go to 20. The good news is, we've all corrected. And it's now, look, this is what the equity would be worth at 1.5 to 2.53. This is that point where you have every right to ask the dumb questions, candidly, especially if you're not coming from a private equity environment. But that's why getting as much financial information upfront as possible. Look, where is the company from a profitability standpoint? What is their EBITDA margins? What are they thinking about from a rule of X? Like, how are they operating? They are all very, very healthy financial indicators as to business performance, which will fundamentally drive how they think about what the equity will be worth at either acquisition or event, etc. And then it's also important from a venture perspective to think about what's happening from a public company market standpoint. We are far past the days of your $150 million VC-backed public company IPO. Those companies won't happen anymore. When you look at what happened last year with the likes of SailPoint and Service Titan and etc., these are all Netscope. These are all $600, $700, $800 million revenue businesses. And that seems to be more of the golden standard from a number perspective for IPO. But you've also got a lot of bigger businesses like a Zendesk that's, X billion and they're private. What's their next play? So just being aware of that, and you will always be sold on, look, this is the growth opportunity and we're going to IPO, but we're $100 million. Just try and unpack that. And that's important to drill into.
As a champion of CMOs, that's all I do, help huddlers win. It's PE firms have made it very hard to love them. I have a long list of issues. One is the tenure. Two is the constant fact that, we just spent $100 million buying this company at 12x earnings, and we're going to squeeze the CMO by 30% on their comp package. And that the notion that CMOs are just like Lego blocks, take one out, put another one in, and that the time spent and invested doesn't have value to the company. So help me see beyond that to some positive stories of CMOs that you've placed at PE firms that are having good experiences, because I know these are your clients, and so clearly you must have something good to say about them.
Oh, no, I've got lots of good things to say about them. When I started working, when I moved out here, 10 years ago, and trying to engage with individuals 10 years ago about private equity, it's very different from today. I think, look, the beauty of private equity in this day and age is you can have meaningful impact incredibly quickly, because you could argue that you live and die by the numbers in the same way that a sales team does. So you can really quickly demonstrate, hey, here's what's working, here's not what's working, and drive fast, quick, meaningful, and actionable impact in a way that maybe that was harder to demonstrate 10 years ago. And if you think about an acquisition is a big event, that's a great win for anybody. And there's lots of acquisitions that are going to happen. There's in this AI world that we're in today as well, there's going to be more and more and more of it. Just look at cybersecurity and what that means. That's huge. You can also make significant amounts of money in private equity too. And I think that's one of the reasons why people like doing that. What we're seeing a lot at the moment is the big PE firms have also, let's say something does happen to a CMO or a CRO within their portco. They're not looking to just shift that person out. It's like, well, where does this person best fit inside our broader portfolio? And so we're seeing this being done across a lot of the big PE firms. So if you're going into one PE firm for a portco, you end up in 3, 4, 5 years time, in an operating partner standpoint or working across various different portfolios that they might have too. And that's been really encouraging to see, candidly, because it keeps you like centralized and it keeps you in a home base in a way that it never used to before. So I do get excited by it, Drew. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily them looking just at this one function. I'm sure they do it with other functions too. I just can't articulate that because I'm not spending my time with anything else other than with marketeers. And again, it just all comes back to the back channeling that you're doing because they're doing on you. Like, what research are you doing on them and finding out about?
And I certainly do know a number of CMOs who've worked for they've figured out how to manage a particular PE system, if you will, and made it work and gone from portfolio company to portfolio company and done very well and had exits, as you say. I feel like for every one of those, there are 10 that didn't have that experience, but you're telling me it's not that bad.
I don't think it's as high as that, Drew. I think it could be that situation of, you hear about all the divorces, but you never hear about your like as happily married couples, if that makes sense. It's not as, the news isn't as interesting in a horrible way. But there are a lot of people that are just doing very well and have really figured it out, how to operate within. And by the way, just because it works at Vista doesn't mean that it might work at Thoma Bravo, that it might work at KKR, because again, even the way that a PE firm might analyze a marketeer could be completely different to the way the CEO analyzes a marketeer. And so that's your first boss, that person there. So remember that. That comes onto reporting structure, and that's a different topic of conversation because that then puts you in wherever you are from a pecking order standpoint. But I still love working within private equity, and in this day and age where you as marketeers can have such quick, meaningful impact, and then none of these PE firms have got a AI playbook ready to deploy from a marketing standpoint. So anything that you have, that you've seen, that you've demonstrated that's worked, that's going to be incredibly exciting. And imagine if you're in portfolio company X and you do what you can do with AI and that works, like why would they not want to then roll that out more broadly? And it's huge opportunity for the marketeers in this day and age.
This is an open call to all you CMOs who have had 3 positive experiences working for a PE-backed firms. Shoot me an email, drew@cmos.com. I want to hear from you. That's part one. You use the term quick, meaningful impact, and I'm really curious what you're seeing and what that looks like, because most of the time when a new CMO goes in, something is seriously broken with the entire go-to-market. There is not a quick fix that marketing can suddenly do a demand gen campaign and change that. There's an issue with customer. It's rare that this is just the last marketer didn't know how to market and a new one comes on and changes some dials and boom, gets that quick impact.
Yeah.
So what do you mean when you say quick impact? What are you seeing?
Well, look, if you unpack that, it's what is the context of why this hire is being made? And let's say, for argument's sake, Drew, per you, it's because, the previous marketeer wasn't able to get traction. They were let go. I think one of the ones that we hear the most is, look, we're weak in account-based marketing. How do we think about our messaging and our positioning? What I mean by quick, meaningful is in this day and age, you can have more faster impact than you've been able to have previously in this function. Quick, meaningful impact could be something in terms of just getting better alignment across an organization for marketing with product, with sales. Like you as the marketeer, you are that bridge between those two functions. It could be better traction and engagement with your customer base, feeding that back into the product roadmap. There's so many things. It doesn't have to be business tangible results, but there is that opportunity too. But understanding the context of why the change is happening, and usually with marketing, because of how all of you have grown up, you've typically probably got a bias in one marketing area over the other. And so it's natural for whenever you replace somebody in that seat, they skewed more heavily towards product marketing. But as a result, like the pipeline was not as well defined, or things were being lost at this part of the process. You know, it's playing to your strengths. And that's where, just even because it's such a broad function, you can have meaningful impact quite quickly because of where your strengths are vis-a-vis where the previous CMO's weaknesses were.
Yes. And most of the things that you described did not look at, may or may not have 3-6 month impact on, say, pipeline, revenue, close rate, time that you got to participate in RFPs. And so that's the part that I see is the disconnect is
Yeah.
right. And what I see and hear is that this conversation, and you should not be in the position of having to defend it, it always comes down to pipeline and close rates and cost per acquisition. That's the conversations, not because look, if we're misaligned and we create better alignment, then suddenly our whole motions are going to change and be better and more effective. That won't show up in an enterprise. That won't have an impact for 9 months.
It'll take time, but that's, I mean, 9 months, if you're there for 4 or 5 years, you know, that's still quicker than it would have been 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I think that's where I'm kind of messaging.
Got it. And by the way, all of this, my rant has nothing to do with what the reality of this marketplace is. And I think it's really important that the CMOs who are listening to this listen to you more than they're listening to me, in the sense that you put people into jobs, you have seen them get jobs, and it feels like the mindset that you're describing is, I, as a candidate, need to be able to demonstrate that I can have a very quick impact, much faster than I could before. And I have a hypothesis about where this impact will happen. And here are the things that we might be able to do together to make that happen. I feel like that's pretty clear.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. I want to ask you to try to do something on the fly here, which is if you could sort of provide 3 key takeaways that you would want every candidate who's in transition to think about or would have taken away from this conversation. You can take a second if you want to think about those 3 key takeaways for CMOs right now who are looking for their next opportunity.
First thing is the diligence component, Drew. It sounds so obvious, but again, like doing your diligence and not just saying yes to the first thing that comes your way. If it's the right thing, then that's okay. But why are you saying yes to this? It's really important. Showing up in the right way throughout an interview process goes an incredibly long way. That would be the second. Being authentic and not over enthusiastic. Again, I'm British, so like anybody that's overly enthusiastic, we're just naturally skeptical of. So there's that balance. So the diligence, the process perspective would be the first 2 things. And then I think the third is, what are you doing outside of, you know, your day-to-day to get smart in the AI technology that exists in this function? And how are you deploying it? How are you using it? How are you utilizing it? I think that will make meaningful impact in your process, in your candidacy. And the fourth thing is, how are you showing up? Like, think about how you look online on your LinkedIn. How does it look? What fractional work are you doing or not doing? And how are you demonstrating that or not demonstrating that? I think one of the biggest things that people overlook is how their profile may appear to be online. And the last part is, how are you utilizing your own network as part of the conversations that you're having?
I love it. All right. Those are amazing takeaways. Boom. Do your homework. 2, show up authentically. 3, what are you doing that's really making that you can walk in and say, and I've seen some CMOs who got jobs, did an incredible AI analysis and showed it in real time that was potentially transformative for that organization. Make sure your online presence is looking good and use the heck out of your network. Hugh Marshall, Heidrick and Struggles. Hugh, where can people find you?
LinkedIn's probably easiest, or the Heidrick website, of course, but I'm in San Francisco. I love the in-person conversations as well. And when I'm fortunate enough to attend any of Drew's events, I will always be there. But otherwise, I'm in the city and then on the peninsula very regularly.
I love it. Okay, make sure that the CMO Super Huddle, October 22nd, 23rd is on your calendar, Hugh. Thank you again for joining us here. If you're a B2B CMO and you want to hear more conversations like this one, find out if you qualify to join our community of sharing, caring, and daring CMOs at cmohuddles.com. Renegade Marketers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Hey, that's me. This show is produced by Melissa Caffrey, Laura Parkin, and Ishar Cuevas. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, and learn more about CMO Huddles or my CMO coaching service, please visit renegademarketing.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser. Until next time, keep those Renegade marketing caps on and strong.